Lisa Whitmore harbored a delusion that her privileged standing rendered her immune to consequences. Upon witnessing a black man claim a parking space she desired, she unleashed a torrent of racist vitriol, disparaged his military service, and belittled his very being. However, mere words proved insufficient for her fury. She struck him across the face, confident in his presumed inability to retaliate. Unbeknownst to her, he was a decorated Navy SEAL, a man conditioned to confront genuine peril, not to be intimidated by inflated egos. The instant he refused to yield to her outrage, she summoned her husband, expecting him to assert dominance over the black man. But when Brad charged forward with unbridled aggression, he received a harsh lesson. Victory in conflict hinges on skill, not brute force. Lisa Whitmore erroneously believed she could assault a black Navy SEAL and depart unscathed. Instead, she was on the precipice of a profound understanding of the repercussions of one's actions. Before we delve further, please share your global location in the comments and ensure you subscribe. Jalen Bennett had long ago cultivated the virtue of patience. This wasn't solely a skill acquired during his military tenure. It was an intrinsic part of his existence, honed through rigorous training, combat, and simply navigating American society as a black man. He understood that self-restraint was as vital for survival as it was for discipline. Words could indeed be weapons, yet silence, when employed with precision, possessed a keener edge. Consequently, when a sharp, insistent car horn blared behind him, imbued with an undeniable sense of entitlement, he did not immediately react. He had just maneuvered into the parking space, barely having engaged the park gear, when he observed the SUV behind him, its angle suggesting the driver had intended to claim the spot for themselves. He sighed, anticipating the identity of the person behind the wheel before even looking. Through the rearview mirror, he caught a fleeting glimpse of her. A woman in her mid-40s, sporting a platinum blonde bob, oversized sunglasses perched atop her head like a makeshift diadem, her mouth already contorted into a disdainful grimace. He recognized the archetype instantly, the self-absorbed individual who believed the world revolved solely around her, the type who had never encountered a definitive no. Jalen flexed his fingers on the steering wheel, taking a deep, fortifying breath. He had absolutely no desire to engage in a dispute over a parking space. Had she been waiting, she should have signaled. Had she signaled, he would have noticed. She had not. The matter should have concluded there. But the moment he exited his vehicle, she was upon him, approaching with rapid, decisive steps, her heels clicking on the pavement like the ominous ticking of a clock. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice high-pitched and strident, betraying an utter lack of consideration for anyone but herself. That was my spot. Jalen closed his door, turned to face her fully, and paused before responding. "Didn't see your name on it," he stated calmly. Her expression intensified, her lips pressing into a thin, rigid line. "I was clearly about to park there." "Didn't see a signal," he replied evenly, his tone measured. "Plenty of other spots open." "That is not the point," she huffed, crossing her arms, her entire posture shifting to one of defiance and obstinacy. "The point is, you people think you can just take whatever you want without consequences." And then it was out in the open. Jalen's jaw tightened for a fleeting instant, but he consciously willed it to relax, exhaling slowly through his nose. He could simply walk away. It wasn't worth the confrontation, not with her, not over this. But she continued her tirade. "This is the problem with this country," she declared, gesturing vaguely, as if addressing a profound societal grievance rather than a trivial parking disagreement. "You move into places you don't belong. You act like you own everything, and then you expect the rest of us to just sit back and let it happen." Jalen regarded her in a prolonged, silent appraisal. He had encountered her kind before. Those who cloaked their malice in the guise of righteous indignation, individuals who genuinely perceived themselves as victims within their distorted perspectives. Yet he had never allowed such people to dictate his comportment. Therefore, when he finally spoke, his voice remained controlled. "Lady, I parked in an open space. That's all that happened here." "No," she snapped, advancing closer, her voice dripping with venom. What happened here is another entitled thug thinking the rules don't apply. And don't look at me like that. I'm not afraid to say it. People like you are ruining this country." Jalen could have found the sheer audacity of her words laughable, but he refrained. He simply exhaled again, tilting his head slightly as he observed her, taking in her posture, the nervous twitch of her fingers, as if daring him to provide her with a pretext to escalate the situation. He was resolute in not obliging her. "You don't know anything about me," he stated plainly, turning to depart. Her laughter followed him, shrill and laced with derision. "Oh, please. Let me guess. You're a good one, right? Served in the military? Think that makes you special?" He stopped, deliberately, slowly, and turned back to face her. "I bled for this country," he affirmed, his voice steady, his gaze fixed on hers. "And people like you don't get to tell me I don't belong in it." For the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed her face, a brief, unreadable expression. But it was there, and then, just as swiftly, she regained her composure, straightening her spine and rolling her eyes. "Oh, cry me a river. The military is a joke. What? You think that makes you better than me? Newsflash. It doesn't. You don't deserve any special treatment just because you chose to go play soldier." Jalen felt a warmth spread up his neck, but he maintained a steady breathing rhythm. He had endured insults before, far worse in environments where hostility was expressed not just with words, but with bullets. However, there was something about this woman, her absolute conviction in her own ignorance, that caused his fingers to twitch at his sides, a fact she noticed. A smug, triumphant expression crossed her face, as if she had achieved a victory, as if she had discovered the precise trigger to elicit a reaction from him. It was at that moment he knew she would not cease. "I bet you think you're tough," she declared, stepping even closer, close enough that he could discern the dilation of her pupils, the sneer that curled her lips around the words. "Bet you think you're some kind of hero. Let me tell you something." She jabbed him in the chest, her touch sharp and insistent. "Once, twice. My husband," she continued, her voice dropping to a lower register laced with pure malice, "is going to teach you a lesson when he gets here." Jalen regarded her, his gaze unwavering. There it was, the escalation, the threat. She was not finished. He could sense it in her quickening breath, in the restless movement of her hands. She was building towards something, drawing sustenance from her own animosity, twisting herself into something reckless, something perilous. And Jalen, who had dedicated his adult life to assessing risk, understood that this encounter would not conclude here. Not with her, not with her ilk, not today. Jalen had spent years training for confrontation, learning the optimal moments to act and to refrain, mastering the art of assessing a situation before it devolved into chaos. He could see it unfolding before him now. Lisa Whitmore, her face flushed and trembling, was no longer merely incensed about a parking spot. That had been the pretext, the flimsy opening to unleash something deeper, something ugly that had likely festered long before she encountered him today. And now, she was not just uttering insults. She was psyching herself up for something more significant. He had witnessed this phenomenon before, the way individuals like her required justification, a rationale, something to cling to in order to convince themselves of their righteousness, even as they crossed ethical boundaries. But he would not make it easy for her. Jalen shifted his weight, his stance relaxed yet solid, his arms still at ease by his sides. His voice, when he spoke, remained controlled. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're upset because I parked in an open space. You're angry because you didn't get it first, and instead of simply finding another one like a reasonable person, you're standing here having a tantrum, proclaiming that people like me are ruining the country." Lisa's eyes flared, but he persisted, interjecting himself into her anger before she could reframe it. "People like me," he repeated, his voice measured. "What does that even mean precisely? Because from my perspective, I parked my car, got out, and minded my own business, while you are the one standing in a parking lot shouting as if you're about to have an aneurysm." A flicker of something crossed her face. Not hesitation, but annoyance at being compelled to articulate her prejudiced thoughts. Jalen understood this type. They preferred their bigotry veiled, cloaked in plausible deniability, allowing them to express their prejudices without direct accountability. Lisa straightened, smoothing her blouse as if to regain her composure. "Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Everywhere you turn, the world's getting worse because of them. Crime is out of control, cities are falling apart, and hard-working people like me are the ones paying the price." Jalen released a slow breath, his patience beginning to fray. "You mean people like me? A Navy SEAL who served in more countries than you can probably name, a man who spent over a decade putting his life on the line while you sat in an air-conditioned house complaining about how difficult your life is." She stiffened, and he observed the precise moment the realization dawned that she had misjudged him, that the image she had constructed of him did not align with the reality standing before her. Yet, she did not retreat. Not yet. "Oh, please," she scoffed, dismissing him with a wave of her hand, as if he had uttered something absurd. "You want a medal? What? You think serving makes you special? Makes you better than me?" Jalen met her gaze, unwavering. "No," he stated. "It just means I don't take freedom for granted. I fought for this country. What have you done for it?" For a moment, Lisa remained silent, her glare fixed upon him, her breathing growing heavier, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. Then she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "The military is a joke. All of you, just a bunch of government pawns pretending you're heroes. You're not fighting for freedom, you're fighting for paychecks." That was the tipping point. Jalen had endured a great deal in his life. He had been insulted, underestimated, and had entered situations knowing people saw his skin color before they saw the man. He had learned to let most of it slide. But this was different, not because she was insulting him personally, but because she was mocking the men and women who had sacrificed everything. His friends, his brothers and sisters in arms, those who had never returned home. His jaw tightened, his breathing deepening, slowing, steadying. "You know what's funny?" he inquired, his voice dropping to a lower, quieter register. "You're standing here talking about who does and doesn't belong in this country, who deserves what, but the only person acting entitled is you. You think this parking spot was yours because why? Because you wanted it. You think I should have just moved because you said so? You think people should step aside for you just because you exist?" Lisa's face was beginning to redden. Her lips pursed so tightly they almost vanished. "I don't know what world you think you live in," Jalen continued, "but the one we're in right now, it doesn't belong to you. And I'm not moving just because you don't like it." Lisa's breathing had become shallow, her entire body coiled tight. The shift occurred with startling rapidity. He perceived it before it fully materialized. The moment her rage surpassed her reason, the instant her mind concluded that words were no longer sufficient. Her hand shot up, fingers curled, and then crack. The slap landed against his cheek, sharp and sudden, sending a ripple of shock through the assembled onlookers. A few gasps escaped, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Jalen remained motionless, did not flinch. He simply stood there, his cheeks stinging, his pulse steady, his mind rapidly processing every conceivable response within the span of a single breath. Lisa's chest heaved, her hands trembling, as if she herself could scarcely believe she had acted. But upon seeing his lack of reaction, his failure to lash out as she had likely anticipated, her expression twisted into one of triumph. "Yeah," she breathed, her voice thick with misplaced satisfaction. "That's what I thought." Jalen exhaled slowly, his fingers flexing at his sides as he regarded her, truly looked at her. Then, with unwavering calmness, he spoke. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." She blinked, her smugness faltering for a brief instant. Jalen did not move, did not advance towards her, did not raise his voice, nor did he alter his stance. However, the certainty in his voice, its quiet finality, introduced a flicker of something new into her expression. Doubt, if only for a second. Then just as quickly it vanished, buried beneath the anger she clung to like protective armor. "Just wait until my husband gets here," she spat, stepping back, her confidence reasserting itself. "He's going to tear you apart." Jalen tilted his head slightly, observing her, feeling the weight of the moment settle. This was far from over, and Lisa Whitmore had no inkling of the profound trouble she had just courted. Jalen exhaled slowly, maintaining his firm stance, his cheek still throbbing from the impact, but his temper held in check by layers of discipline. His patience had been tested before, by far more severe circumstances. He had confronted threats in foreign lands, endured enemy fire, witnessed the nadir of human behavior, yet moments like these still managed to test the edges of his control. He had afforded Lisa Whitmore every opportunity to disengage. She had chosen aggression. Jalen adjusted his posture subtly, rolling his shoulders as he assessed her, his expression calm and inscrutable. The satisfaction in her eyes conveyed everything. She believed she had won. She was convinced that the slap had sealed her victory, that she had reduced him to nothing more than a man compelled to endure her rage due to her perceived superiority. She had no comprehension of how profoundly she had miscalculated. Jalen tilted his head, observing her as she squared her shoulders, preparing for another exchange. Believing she still held command of the situation, he allowed a pregnant pause to stretch between them, permitting the tension to thicken the air before he finally spoke. His voice was low, steady, and resolute. "You're going to apologize," he stated, each word delivered with deliberate emphasis. "You're going to take a deep breath, acknowledge that you made an error, and you're going to walk away because I assure you, if you do not, you will regret it." Lisa's lips curled, her breath catching slightly as her face darkened with fury. "Regret it!" she shrieked, her voice shrill, incredulous, imbued with an almost manic disbelief that someone like him would presume to address her in such a manner. "Oh, I don't think so. You don't tell me what to do. You don't get to threaten me. I am not sorry." The final words erupted in a cry, her entire body trembling with unrestrained wrath. Jalen remained motionless, his gaze steady. Then she lunged, her hands flying towards him, wild and reckless, nails extended, fists swinging. Jalen moved with fluid grace, sidestepping, observing as she stumbled forward when her attack met empty air. Her second swing followed immediately, a slap aimed at his face, but he had anticipated it before she even committed to the movement. He leaned back just enough for her palm to miss by inches, watching as her own momentum caused her to lose her balance slightly. She was undisciplined, untrained, attacking out of pure emotional chaos rather than strategic intent or control. It was almost comical how ineffectual she was. Had she not been so blinded by rage, she might have perceived the sheer absurdity of her actions. The third attack came, a wild, flailing attempt to strike his chest. This time, Jalen raised his arm, blocking effortlessly, his forearm absorbing the impact without the slightest flinch. The fourth and fifth strikes followed in rapid succession, one aimed for his abdomen, the other for his shoulder. Jalen stepped back smoothly, evading, his expression bordering on boredom, as if the entire encounter were more of an annoyance than a genuine threat. Lisa's breathing was now ragged, her hands trembling from exertion, her face blotchy with rage and humiliation. She had anticipated a reaction, a retreat, a raised voice, a moment where she could play the victim. She had wanted him to retaliate, to lose control, thereby justifying everything she had said and done. Jalen had denied her that satisfaction, and that was what made her snap. "Fight me!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Stop standing there like a coward and fight me!" Jalen clenched his jaw, his patience finally exhausted. The next time she swung, he caught her wrist. The instant his fingers closed around her arm, she froze. Her breath hitched, her eyes widened. Jalen did not squeeze, did not twist, did not apply any unnecessary force. He simply held her still, immobilizing her, preventing her from continuing this ridiculous, pathetic display of aggression. Lisa struggled, yanking at her arm, but his grip was like iron, unyielding and immovable. "Let go of me!" she shrieked, twisting, fighting against the impossibility of the situation, because in that moment, for the first time, she understood that she had lost. Jalen leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, ensuring only she could hear him. "I'm done letting you take swings at me," he murmured. You want to act like a rabid dog, but now you're crying the second you realize you can't win. I told you to walk away. This is on you." Lisa's chest heaved, her lips trembling. And then she crumbled. She emitted a gasping, shaky sob, her body going limp, the rage melting into something pitiful and pathetic as she abruptly switched roles. "Help!" she screamed, her voice now thick with hysteria, her eyes darting around, searching for someone, anyone, to come to her aid. "He's hurting me. Somebody help me." Jalen immediately released her, stepping back, his hands raised in a gesture of non-aggression, his expression calm but weary, for he had anticipated this. He should have known she would resort to such tactics. People like her always did. The woman who had been slapping, clawing, and screaming mere moments before was now a damsel in distress, performing for the crowd, choking on her own fabricated tears, her voice trembling with the effort of portraying herself as the victim. Jalen remained stationary, did not flinch as her performance continued. He knew better than to argue, better than to attempt to convince anyone watching that the woman sobbing in the parking lot had been physically attacking him moments prior. He simply stood there, allowing her to dig her own grave. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some individuals appeared uncertain. Others continued to record on their phones, capturing everything: the slap, the assaults, the moment he had restrained her without causing any harm. Lisa turned, desperation evident, her eyes wild, searching for someone, anyone, to intervene, to defend her, to ensure this moment did not conclude with her appearing weak and pathetic. And then she saw him, her husband. Jalen barely had time to react before the doors of the shopping center swung open and Brad Whitmore emerged. Tall and broad-shouldered, he possessed the physique of a former high school athlete, but carried the air of a man who had achieved little of note since. His gaze shifted from his wife to Jalen, then back again. Lisa emitted a distressed cry, lunging towards Brad as if escaping a fiery inferno, seizing his arm with a desperate grip and burying her face in his chest, sobs racking her body. Brad's eyes darkened, his hands tightening on her shoulders, his entire frame rigid, his expression morphing from bewilderment to raw fury in an instant. At that moment, Jalen understood this was far from over. Jalen had encountered adversaries before, heard their taunts, their slurs, and witnessed the bluster of men whose insecurity manifested as aggression. He'd navigated situations thick with animosity, where words escalated to violence, and the split second between disengagement and the first blow could mean the difference between survival and tragedy. Yet this encounter possessed a peculiar absurdity. Facing him now was Brad Whitmore, a man whose imposing physique, broad shoulders, muscular arms, the build of a once promising athlete, still projected an aura of dominance. Time had softened his edges, but he carried himself with the unwavering conviction of a man who had never known defeat, who still believed his sheer presence could compel submission. Lisa clung to his arm, her weeping in obvious performance, her body trembling with feigned distress. She clutched him like a damsel, barely escaping a life-threatening ordeal, her fingers digging into his sleeve as she murmured something inaudible to Jalen. Brad's eyes, already simmering with burgeoning anger, flickered to Jalen, narrowed, and then, predictably, he resorted to the familiar tactic of racial prejudice. "Thugs like you," he spat, his voice laced with venom, his posture shifting as he squared his shoulders, puffing out his chest like a cornered animal. "You think you can lay hands on women and walk away scot-free? Don't people like you know their place? You believe society's leniency grants you carte blanche with no repercussions?" He took a step closer, fists clenching at his sides, nostrils flaring. "Well, guess what? I am your consequence." Jalen nearly chuckled. Almost. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, observing the man before him. He noted the coiled tension in Brad's muscles, the quickening of his breath, the desperate effort to project an image of greater size, ferocity, and toughness. It was pathetic. "Let me clarify," Jalen stated, his voice remarkably calm. "Your wife initiated physical contact with me multiple times. You arrived late, entirely ignorant of the actual events, and now you fancy yourself a hero." Lisa emitted a theatrical gasp, her fingers tightening their hold on Brad's arm. "He's lying!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with manufactured indignation. "He grabbed me!" Jalon exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "There are cameras, madam. People were recording. Do you truly believe anyone will side with you?" Lisa's mouth opened and snapped shut, her gaze darting around, searching the faces of bystanders, a flicker of panic crossing her features before she doubled down. Brad, however, had already reached his conclusion. "I don't need a damn video to tell me what happened," he declared, his voice dropping, his hands clenching tighter, his breathing growing heavier. "I know your kind. You're all the same. A bunch of violent ne'er-do-wells." Jalon didn't need to hear the rest. He saw the inevitable unfolding before it began. The shift in Brad's weight, the subtle bend in his knees, the overt rage that bled into his movements even before his body committed to action. Then he charged. Jalon remained still, neither flinching nor tensing. He simply waited. Brad lunged forward with speed, aiming high. His right arm swung in a wide, uncontrolled arc, his face contorted with fury. It was a crude, aggressive attack, driven by arrogance and ignorance, the kind of assault that might overwhelm someone unaccustomed to combat, someone prone to panic. Jalon was not that man. At the last possible moment, he shifted his head slightly, allowing the punch to whistle past his face, missing by mere inches. Brad stumbled forward, momentum carrying him off balance. Jalon barely moved. Brad swung again. This time, Jalon sidestepped with fluid grace, his body moving like water, making it appear as though Brad were fighting an apparition. The onlookers gasped. Lisa screamed something unintelligible and plunged into the confrontation, her nails flashing as she lunged at Jalon's face like a feral beast. Jalon sighed, pivoted, and allowed her to trip over her own feet. She landed hard on the pavement, her shriek turning into a sharp cry of pain, her knee scraping against the asphalt as her palms struck the ground. Brad, still enraged and too foolish to acknowledge his disadvantage, launched a third attempt, throwing a wild haymaker with all his might. A grave miscalculation. Jalon saw his opportunity. He stepped inside Brad's swing, closing the distance instantly, and landed a clean fist to the man's ribs. Air rushed from Brad's lungs in a strangled gasp. His body buckled. Jalon could have ended it then, let Brad collapse and humiliate himself before everyone. But then Brad did something he truly shouldn't have. Still gasping for breath, hunched over in agony, he spat out one final utterance. Something vile. Something so steeped in hatred that even the onlookers recoiled. Jalon didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. He swung. The punch connected squarely with Brad's jaw. A perfect, precise strike delivered with controlled force and intent. Brad's head snapped to the side. His body followed, collapsing to the pavement in a single fluid motion, his legs giving out, his consciousness fading before he even hit the ground. A full second of silence ensued. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then Lisa shrieked. It was a sound so piercing, so laden with fury and disbelief, that it sliced through the stunned quiet like a blade. She scrambled to Brad's unconscious form, shaking his shoulders, her hands grasping his face, screaming his name repeatedly. Jalon exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders, adjusting his stance. The crowd erupted in cheers. Not all of them, but enough. Enough for Lisa to whip around, her face a mask of absolute fury, her mouth opening to lash out, to try and twist the narrative. Jalon merely looked at her, calm, unfazed. Jalon stood motionless, his breathing steady, his shoulders relaxed, his posture at perfect ease. Despite the turmoil unfolding before him, the impact of the punch had already dissipated from his fist. His training ensured he didn't dwell on the action itself, only the outcome. Brad Whitmore lay sprawled on the pavement, unmoving save for the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. The deep, unconscious breaths of a man whose body had surrendered long before his pride ever would. Lisa continued to shriek, her hands pawing at her husband's face, shaking his shoulders, rocking him as if sheer desperation could bring him back to awareness. Her breath came in frantic, heaving gasps, her face a blotchy testament to rage and disbelief. Her entire body trembled as the stark reality of what had transpired began to sink in. Jalin remained still, silent. He simply observed, as did the crowd. Phones remained aloft. Hushed whispers exchanged amongst onlookers, some muttering curses, others openly smirking. As Lisa continued her performance, the weight of witness testimony settled over the scene like an immovable force, proof that no amount of screaming or theatrics could alter the events that had just occurred. Lisa finally ceased rocking Brad. Her movements slowed. Her gaze darted wildly across the gathered faces, her mind desperately searching for an escape. Her breath hitched, her fingers curled into fists as she turned slowly, deliberately toward Jalin. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, her entire demeanor shifted. "You!" she gasped, her voice trembling, thick with feigned terror. She pushed herself up from the ground, staggering to her feet, one hand still clutching Brad's limp arm. "You're a monster!" Jalin raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. The crowd wasn't buying it either. "Lady," someone muttered, "your husband ran at him first. You both attacked him. What did you expect to happen?" Lisa's head snapped toward the voice, her eyes wild, but the murmurs were growing louder. People nodded, shaking their heads at her as if she were a poorly cast actress in a B-movie. She licked her lips, panic flashing across her face before she doubled down, positioning herself between Jalin and her still unconscious husband. "He assaulted us!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. "He tried to kill Brad!" Laughter erupted, quick and sharp, from somewhere in the back of the crowd. "Yeah, 'cause it sure looked like he barely broke a sweat while your man swung like a drunk in a bar fight." Lisa's face flushed crimson, her nails digging into her palms as she whipped around to check on Brad, as if hoping the sight of his crumpled form would sway the increasingly skeptical audience back to her side. Then with a low, pained groan, Brad began to stir. Lisa gasped, dropping to her knees, grabbing his face, patting his cheek, desperate to pull him back into the moment. His eyelids fluttered, unfocused at first, and then he winced, lifting a shaky hand to his already swelling jaw. Jalin watched, silent as Brad blinked, his mind sluggishly catching up to what had just transpired. The memory of it all flooded back in real time. The charge, the swings, the repeated misses. And then, darkness. And now, here he was, on the ground, defeated, publicly humiliated. The second his gaze found Jalin's, it burned with hatred. "You son of a—" His words were a low snarl, his voice ravaged by pain. But Lisa was already pulling at his arms, helping him sit up, whispering hurried words into his ear that Jalin didn't need to hear to understand. She was attempting to reconstruct the narrative before he was fully back, trying to frame it, shape it, mold it into something they could live with. But Brad wasn't listening. His pride seethed, his anger swelled, his humiliation consumed him entirely. He shoved Lisa away, forcing himself to his feet, swaying momentarily before finding his balance, fists clenched at his sides, his eyes locked onto Jalin with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Think you're tough?" he snarled, his voice thick with something dangerous, something bitter. "Think you can just do whatever the hell you want? You think this is over?" Jalin offered no response. He didn't need to. Lisa grabbed at Brad's sleeve, whispering something again, this time with urgency, her nails digging into his arm. Brad barely glanced at her. Instead, his eyes fell upon Jalin's car. The instant Jalin saw it, he knew what was about to happen. Brad wrenched free from Lisa's grip, stumbled 2 steps toward the pavement, and then his eyes landed on a rock, a jagged, heavy chunk of asphalt broken from the edge of the parking lot, lying just within reach. Before anyone could react, Brad bent down, grabbed it, and hurled it. Jalin watched it happen. But it wasn't until the impact that he truly processed what had been done. Crash! The rock slammed against the windshield, shattering it instantly. The sound was deafening, glass spiderwebbed outward in a violent explosion of cracks, shards cascading down like fractured ice. Jalin's breath hitched. He had anticipated the throw, but he hadn't expected it to actually connect. For the first time, He felt something other than control, something akin to rage, something like genuine, raw anger. His hands clenched, his jaw tightened, his pulse quickened. He forced himself to breathe, to slow it down, to lock it away before it acted on his behalf. Lisa screamed at Brad, panic finally piercing through her arrogance. "We have to go now." Brad hesitated for a mere second. Then, exhibiting the cowardice inherent in him, he turned and ran. Lisa followed, her heels slapping against the pavement as she dragged Brad toward their SUV. Jalan stood there, still gazing at his car, his mind grappling with the damage, with the sharp splinters of glass still trickling onto the hood. Engines revved, tires screeched. The SUV peeled out of the lot, speeding away, disappearing down the road in a desperate attempt to escape the wreckage they had created. The ensuing silence was palpable. The weight of the damage continued to settle, and then, from somewhere within the crowd, a voice finally broke the quiet. "You gonna let them just get away with that?" Jalan slowly turned his head, his gaze returning to the shattered glass, the deep, ugly scar across the vehicle he had purchased with his own hard-earned money. His fingers flexed, his shoulders squared, his mind made up in an instant. Then, just as deliberately, he looked back up the road where they had vanished. Jalan stood there for a long moment, his mind processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. His car, his meticulously maintained, fully paid-for vehicle, sat before him with a web of shattered glass stretched across its windshield. The jagged remnants still trembled from the impact. The hood was dusted with splinters of broken glass, tiny shards glinting in the afternoon sun like scattered diamonds. The rock itself had bounced off, rolling a few feet across the pavement, its edges slick with the fine dust of impact. He should have anticipated it. He had seen the rage in Brad's eyes, the desperation in Lisa's. They had lost, and losing was not something they could accept. Weak individuals always lashed out when their pride was wounded. The problem was, they had just made it personal. Jalan inhaled deeply, rolling his shoulders, forcing his heartbeat to return to an even, measured rhythm. He refused to let this unsettle him, refused to let them dictate his next move. His anger was not like theirs. It was not sloppy, reckless, or unfocused. His anger was deliberate, and right now it was urging him to act. He pivoted smoothly, stepping toward his driver's side door, his boots crunching on stray pieces of glass scattered across the pavement. As he opened it, a soft, crystalline rain of fragments cascaded from the doorframe, spilling onto the leather interior. He exhaled slowly, then reached inside, sweeping the pieces off his seat with a firm sweep of his palm, feeling the sharp edges bite against his skin before scattering to the floor mat. He didn't even flinch. Once satisfied, he slid inside, adjusting his position slightly, listening to the faint crackle of residual glass beneath his boots, his fingers wrapped around the steering wheel, steady, controlled, unshaken. The engine roared to life with a low, smooth growl, the deep purr of finely tuned mechanics responding to his touch. He let it run for a moment, allowing himself to breathe, to fully embrace the weight of the moment. Then, with a calm precision that was almost unnerving, he shifted into gear. The instant his tires met the pavement, his focus narrowed, his body slipping into a familiar state, a level of readiness he hadn't felt in a considerable time. His mind categorized the situation like a mission briefing. Targets in sight, vehicle in motion, pursuit initiated. No wasted movements, no unnecessary emotion, just pure action. The SUV had sped off towards the parking lot exit, weaving through slower traffic, desperate to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the consequences of their actions. They believed they were escaping. They were not. Jalan's grip on the wheel was firm but relaxed as he navigated out of his parking spot, merging smoothly onto the main road without hesitation. The fractured windshield was a distraction, the cracks splintering across his field of vision, but he adjusted effortlessly, his gaze finding every available gap through the damage. Up ahead, the silver SUV was moving fast, recklessly. Lisa was undoubtedly screaming at Brad to accelerate, to lose him, to ensure this didn't come back to haunt them. But Jalan was already closing the distance, his foot pressing steadily on the accelerator, his instincts guiding him, every change in speed, every lane, change precise, calculated, effortless. His body remembered this. The chase, the intense focus, the heightened awareness. Brad was driving like a panicked fool, jerking the wheel too sharply with every lane change. His speed was erratic, his decisions reactive rather than planned. Jalon, conversely, moved like water, flowing smoothly through traffic. Each decision was made before the other driver even registered what was happening. It took less than a minute before he had them back in his sights. He could see them now, just a few cars ahead. Lisa's frantic silhouette visible in the passenger seat, her hands gesturing wildly as she screamed at Brad, no doubt urging him to drive faster. Go, go, go! Jalon let out a slow breath, rolling his neck slightly, feeling the tension ease rather than build, because this was easy. They were predictable, panicked, sloppy, and they had no idea who they had just provoked. The road stretched ahead, the sun beginning its descent, long shadows cast across the pavement, the hum of engines filling the space between him and his target. Jalon flicked his eyes to the rearview mirror for half a second. Traffic assessment indicated it was steady but not congested. There was room to maneuver, to move. Good. He tightened his grip just slightly, and then, with the calm demeanor of a man who had already determined the outcome, he pressed down on the accelerator, his car surging forward, slicing through the space between him and them, the distance closing inch by inch. They could run, but they would not get away. Jalon could feel the road beneath him, the subtle vibrations of his car responding to every flick of the wheel, every shift in speed, every deliberate maneuver. He wasn't just chasing them now, he was wearing them down. The SUV remained ahead, weaving erratically. Brad drove like a desperate animal cornered, his fear overriding any remaining semblance of logic. He was making mistakes. His turns were too sharp, his acceleration too uneven, his decision-making sloppy. Jalon, on the other hand, was flawless. He maintained just enough distance to avoid drawing attention from other drivers, yet stayed close enough that Brad could feel him there, lurking just outside his comfort zone. He understood the effect that kind of pressure had on a man unaccustomed to it. It made them reckless. It made them foolish. Lisa must have been screaming in his ear, her silhouette still frantic in the passenger seat, her hands gesturing wildly. Jalon couldn't hear her, but he didn't need to. He knew precisely what was happening inside that car. She was panicking. Brad was attempting to feign composure, but the truth was sinking in. They weren't going to escape. Up ahead, the road split into a T-intersection, offering only two options, left or right. Jalon had already made the decision for them. The right lane was congested with traffic, leaving only one viable route, and Jalon was about to ensure that route led directly to disaster. He flicked his wheel slightly, closing in on Brad's left side, positioning himself exactly where he needed to be. Brad saw it and panicked. The SUV jerked violently to the right, Brad attempting to swerve out of reach, but the split-second decision proved costly. He failed to check his blind spot. He didn't even consider it, and that was his final mistake. Another car was already there. Its driver honked loudly as Brad yanked the wheel, narrowly avoiding a sideswipe. The abrupt swerve sent him careening sharply toward the left, the tires emitting a piercing shriek as the SUV fishtailed across the intersection, directly colliding with a solid concrete pole. The impact was immediate, brutal, and unavoidable. The front section of the SUV crumpled against the pole with a thunderous roar. Metal warped inward, the glass of the windshield instantly fractured into a spiderweb pattern as the vehicle lurched to an abrupt halt. The entire chassis shuddered from the sheer force of the impact. The hood buckled inward, wisps of smoke hissing from beneath it. For a fleeting instant, the world fell silent. Jalon gently released the accelerator, his own car gliding forward with effortless grace as he approached the wreckage. His breathing remained even, his grip on the steering wheel relaxed yet poised, his heart beating with a steady rhythm. He wasted no time. Shifting the vehicle into park, he exited, his movements swift and decisive. His boots struck the asphalt with purpose, his stride fluid and economical. He didn't allow a single second to pass in idleness. Inside the wrecked SUV, Lisa was still emitting sounds of distress, clutching her face, her body racked with tremors of shock and terror. Brad, however, was conscious. Though disoriented, his hands fumbled with the door latch, an attempt to force it open, to break free. Jalon reached him first. With a single, swift motion, he wrenched the door open. Brad had barely time to register the action before Jalon's hand was on him, and then he was being pulled out. Jalon yanked him from the mangled vehicle as if he weighed next to nothing, dragging him onto the pavement in one continuous, flowing movement. Brad stumbled, his footing uncertain, his head still reeling from the crash. But Jalon offered no respite. The initial blow landed with significant force, a calculated, punishing strike to his ribs, expelling the air from Brad's lungs before he could even comprehend the assault. The second followed without delay, a savage, relentless jab to the abdomen, causing Brad to double over, gasping for breath, choking on his own agony. Jalon's onslaught continued. He was far from finished. The subsequent strike sent Brad collapsing onto the ground, his body contorting as he moaned in pain, his hands scrabbling ineffectually at the concrete as he desperately, yet futilely, tried to regain his footing. Jalon stood over him, his imposing presence casting a dark shadow upon the broken man below. Brad coughed, his breathing shallow and ragged, his body quivering, his hands trembling as he attempted to retreat. Jalon reached down, grasped him by his shirt collar, and hauled him back to his feet. Brad's face was already a ruin, his nose bleeding profusely, his jaw beginning to swell, his entire being radiating defeat. His eyes, red-rimmed, filled with a mixture of terror and fury, flickered upward to meet Jalon's gaze. But any trace of defiance had vanished. No confidence, no swagger, only pure fear remained. "You made a grave error," Jalon murmured, his voice low, steady, and absolute. Brad shook his head frantically, his lips parting, attempting to articulate words, to salvage some vestige of his shattered pride. But Jalon had heard enough. The concluding blow was the most precise of the entire exchange, a clean, devastating right hook that landed squarely on the jaw. Brad's head snapped violently to the side. His body went slack, and then he fell. Jalon allowed him to strike the pavement face first, unconscious. Lisa's shriek of sheer horror sliced through the charged atmosphere, her voice raw with disbelief and shock. Jalon turned, his gaze steely, meeting hers through the shattered expanse of the windshield. She was paralyzed, her entire body rigidly locked in place, her hands pressed firmly against the dashboard, her eyes wide with terror. For the first time, her screams ceased. For the first time, she was silent. And Jalon, he remained standing, unyielding, unfazed, unstoppable. Jalon exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as he surveyed the limp, unconscious form of Brad sprawled on the pavement like discarded refuse. The man was not dead, but he was undeniably rendered senseless. His face was swollen, his body still exhibiting residual twitches from the brutal assault he had just endured. The intense fury that had consumed Jalon earlier had now subsided into something more acute, something quieter, yet equally lethal, a focused, unwavering sense of retribution. This was not merely about the shattered windshield, the altercation in the parking lot, or the constant stream of insults hurled at him as if he were less than human. No, this was about accountability, and Lisa Whitmore was next. He redirected his attention toward the SUV, his footsteps measured and deliberate. As he approached the passenger side, his gaze passing through the fractured web of the windshield, he could observe her trembling, her entire frame shaking uncontrollably, her hands gripping the dashboard with such force that her knuckles had turned stark white. For the first time, she wasn't shouting. For the first time, she wasn't issuing demands, making accusations, or lamenting her perceived victimhood and the injustices she believed the world had inflicted upon her. She was overcome with fear. Jalon reached the door and yanked it open. Lisa emitted a sharp gasp, her entire body jolting backward against the seat, her breaths coming in short, frantic bursts as if she had just rediscovered the sensation of breathing. Jalon remained silent initially, simply observing her. His mere presence caused her to shrink away, her demeanor transforming from the entitled, aggressive woman who had instigated this entire predicament to someone who had finally grasped the magnitude of her misjudgment in confronting the wrong individual. Her lips parted, her voice cracking as she attempted to regain a semblance of composure. I didn't do anything," she stammered, her words tumbling out in a desperate, uneven rush. This was all him. It was Brad, not me. You saw it? Everyone saw it. He's the one who threw the rock." Jalen raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Yes. And who instructed him to do so?" Lisa flinched. Who initiated the physical aggression in that parking lot?" he pressed, his voice still calm, controlled, and cutting through the remaining vestiges of her deceit like a sharp blade. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Jalen did not wait for her to formulate another response. "You are under citizen's arrest," he declared, his tone firm and final. Lisa blinked, her head jerking forward as if she had misheard him, her eyes wide with frantic desperation. "What?" she rasped, shaking her head, emitting a hysterical, broken laugh. You can't do that. You're not a police officer. You can't just arrest me." Jalen tilted his head slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "But I can, Lisa." Her breath hitched. "You physically assaulted me," he continued, his voice slow and deliberate, ensuring each word carried significant weight. "You and your husband attacked me. You fled the scene. You destroyed my property. You endangered lives by driving with utter recklessness. And now, after all of that, you expect to simply sit here and cry your way out of this situation?" Lisa shook her head violently, her hands rising in a feeble gesture of protest, as if such emotion alone could negate everything that had transpired. No. You don't understand," she sputtered, her words rushed and incoherent, her voice rising again. I was scared. I didn't know what was happening. You were acting aggressively. I got out of the car." Lisa froze. Jalen did not hesitate. His hand shot forward, his grip firm but not aggressive, and pulled her from the passenger seat in one smooth, effortless motion. She let out a sharp cry, stumbling as her heels scraped against the pavement, her body barely maintaining its balance, her hands flailing at his grip, her voice breaking into pure hysteria. "Let go of me!" she shrieked, her body twisting violently in an attempt to wrench herself free. Jalen barely reacted, his grip tightening around her wrists, restraining her with the same ease he had demonstrated previously. Controlled, calculated, unwavering. She struggled, but her efforts were futile. Jalen simply adjusted his hold, turning her around, forcing her arms behind her back, his movements fluid and methodical. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, her voice raw, her body trembling with sheer disbelief. I will have you arrested. I will sue you. I will—" "Lisa Whitmore," Jalen interrupted, his voice steady. "You are under citizen's arrest. You will remain here until the police arrive. You will not move. You will not resist. And you will not attempt to escape." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper, dangerously calm. "Because if you do, you will not appreciate the consequences that follow." Lisa's breath hitched, her struggles weakening. The realization that there was no escape had finally dawned upon her. Jalen could feel her trembling, her chest rising and falling in short, panicked bursts, her body still in a state of physical resistance, but her spirit beginning to break. The gravity of the moment had finally caught up to her. And then, in the distance, the faint sound of sirens, growing steadily louder, filling the street with an undeniable presence. The flashing blue and red lights of police cruisers pierced the tension like a blade. Lisa turned her head slightly, her expression dissolving into something truly pathetic, her lip trembling, her entire body slumping with the dawning realization that this was not going to conclude in the manner she had always anticipated. Jalen, still calm, still unshaken, simply adjusted his grip, his gaze fixed on the approaching squad cars, his expression inscrutable. This was it. This was justice, and Lisa Whitmore was about to face it in its entirety. The first squad car screeched to a halt near the mangled remains of the SUV, its doors flying open before the officers had even had a chance to fully assess the scene. Two uniformed officers exited rapidly, hands resting on their belts, their eyes immediately locking onto the black man restraining a sobbing white woman in the middle of the street. Jalen didn't need to hear the initial command to anticipate what was coming. It was, "Sir, release her and place your hands where we can see them." It was not a request. Jalen felt the shift in the air, the palpable tension, the way the officers' hands hovered near their holsters, their eyes narrowing as they took in the scene without all the pertinent details. It made no difference that Lisa's mascara-streaked face was contorted with feigned tears, or that Brad was still sprawled unconscious on the pavement a few feet away. They saw Jalen first, and he understood the implications of that. He maintained a slow, steady breathing pattern, deliberate movements, and a measured tone of voice. "This is a citizen's arrest, officer. She and her husband attacked me and have committed multiple offenses, including vandalism, assault, reckless endangerment, and fleeing the scene of a crime." Lisa emitted a wretched sob, her body slumping dramatically as if the mere weight of his hands had somehow crushed her. "He's lying. He's insane. He's violent. He attacked my husband." The officers were no longer listening to him. One of them moved closer, his other hand now resting on his holster, his voice sharper. I said, "Release her, now." Jalen clenched his jaw but knew better than to argue. He released Lisa's wrists, slowly raising his hands, his posture calm but unmistakably firm, the manner of a soldier diffusing a volatile situation. Lisa stumbled forward with exaggerated drama, immediately clutching at one of the officers as if she had just been rescued from a kidnapping. He hurt me. He tried to kill my husband," she wailed, her entire body shaking as she buried herself into the officer's side, her fingers gripping his uniform as if she had just survived some horrific ordeal. Jalen stood his ground, his expression unreadable, his hands still slightly raised, but his shoulders squared. He could observe the officers processing her words, how readily they accepted her narrative. One of them turned toward him, stepping closer, a pair of handcuffs in his hand. "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." For the first time, Jalen felt his patience begin to fray. "I did nothing wrong." The officer's jaw tightened. "Sir, we will sort this out, but I need you to comply." Lisa sniffled loudly, nodding rapidly, her hands still clinging to the officer as if he were her personal bodyguard. "He's dangerous. He's a thug. He just started attacking us out of nowhere. That is a falsehood." The new voice cut through the chaos like a sharp blade. Lisa's rambling ceased. The officers hesitated. Jalen turned slightly toward the source of the voice. A man had stepped forward from the gathering crowd, appearing to be in his mid-40s, tall, wearing a dark polo shirt with a name tag clipped to the front. The store manager. He held a phone in his hands, the screen still illuminated. He lifted it slightly, his voice calm but commanding. "I witnessed the entire incident, and so did my cameras." Lisa went rigid. The officers turned toward him, their postures shifting, their eyes flicking to the phone. Jalen remained silent. He simply observed. "I have footage from our parking lot cameras," the manager continued, stepping closer, his voice now carrying an authority that demanded attention. "And I have approximately a dozen videos from customers who recorded the entire event." One of the officers frowned, glancing at the phone. "What precisely are we viewing?" The manager held it up, pressed play, and suddenly everything changed. Lisa's own voice blared at full volume, her shrieking insults laced with racist vitriol, slapping Jalen, initiating the attack, threatening him, instructing Brad to teach him a lesson. The videos captured it all. Brad charging like a reckless fool, swinging wildly, Lisa joining in, both of them ultimately losing. The evidence was irrefutable. Jalen observed the exact moment the officers realized their error. One of them shifted uncomfortably, his grip loosening on the handcuffs, his jaw clenching slightly as he absorbed the information. Lisa's breathing quickened, her face turned pale, her hands began to tremble, her entire performance unraveling in real time. Brad remained unconscious, unable to extricate her from this predicament. She opened her mouth, her voice now weaker. "That's not—" The officer cut her off, turning toward her. "Ma'am, please, step away from me." Lisa's face crumpled. The other officer, the one who had been preparing to handcuff Jalen mere moments before, turned toward him instead. "Sir, I apologize. We had limited information upon arrival. It appears you were acting in self-defense." Jalen remained motionless, not relaxing, not saying, "You were ready to arrest me without any proof," although he was inclined to do so. Instead, he simply nodded. "That is correct." The first officer was already turning attention toward Lisa, who was now backing away, her eyes darting between them all, seeking an escape route. But there was none to be found. "Lisa Whitmore, you are under arrest for assault, inciting violence, and reckless endangerment." Lisa emitted a choked sob. Her entire body began to shake violently, her hands rising in protest. But it was too late. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Jalen watched, his expression unreadable. Lisa Whitmore stood there, her hands cuffed behind her back, her chest heaving, her breath ragged as the weight of her new reality finally began to settle in. The officers flanked her, their expressions unreadable but firm, their patience clearly wearing thin after witnessing her meltdown. She had spent the last 10 minutes attempting to talk her way out of the situation, cycling through every desperate tactic imaginable, pleading, crying, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, even trying to place the blame entirely on Brad. None of it had yielded any success. She had been caught, exposed, and publicly humiliated. And the most galling aspect for her was that Jalen Bennett remained standing there, unshaken, observing the entire unfolding scene with the quiet, unbothered composure of a man who had secured victory before the confrontation had even commenced. That was the catalyst. Jalen could see it happen. The precise moment her demeanor shifted, transforming into something venomous, something ugly, something even more unhinged than before. The sobs ceased abruptly, her eyes sharpened, her body stiffened, her mouth pressed into a thin, trembling line before she erupted. "You think you're superior to me?" she shrieked, her voice raw, wild, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control over something she had long since lost. Jalen exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as he tilted his head slightly, regarding her with a long, disinterested gaze. "Oh, I don't think I'm superior to you," he stated, his tone smooth, casual, utterly unimpressed. "I know I am." The instant the words left his lips, Lisa lost whatever vestiges of self-control remained. She lunged forward, attempting to bridge the distance between them, her body twisting violently against the restraints, her face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. "You filthy, low-life thug!" she shrieked, her voice cracking from the sheer force of her animosity. "You don't belong here. You don't belong in this country. You don't belong amongst decent people. You are a nobody, a disgusting monkey." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. The sheer venom they contained stained the atmosphere, causing even the police officers to flinch. The small crowd that had remained to observe the scene collectively inhaled, a stunned silence descending upon the street. But Jalen simply smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was not a smirk. It was not even one of amusement. It was the kind of smile a man gives when he knows with absolute certainty that the person before him has just sealed their own doom. He took a step forward, slow and deliberate, watching as Lisa instinctively tried to step back, her body still fighting against the handcuffs, her balance nearly failing. She appeared so diminished now. Jalen allowed the moment to linger. He let her savor the final gasps of power she believed she still possessed before he irrevocably sealed her fate. "Are you finished?" he asked, his voice calm. Lisa's chest heaved, her mouth still open, her rage still simmering, but she had nothing left. No more pretexts, no more manipulation, no more games. Jalen exhaled slowly, straightening, adjusting his stance slightly before delivering what he knew would shatter any remaining delusions she held. "You know what, Lisa? His voice was almost amused now, as if he were merely vocalizing his thoughts. I wasn't even going to press charges. Lisa froze. Jalon let the words sink in, observing as her lips parted slightly, as her entire frame seemed to lock in place. But now, he continued, his voice still maddeningly calm, casual, almost bored, I believe I would be doing the world a considerable service by ensuring you pay for every last transgression. The moment stretched, and then she lost it completely. No, you can't. You can't do this, Lisa screamed, thrashing violently, yanking against the cuffs, her entire body convulsing with rage and panic. I am a good woman. I am a tax-paying citizen. I have a family. You cannot do this to me. Jalon simply shrugged. You should have considered all of that before you launched into a full-blown racist tirade in a parking lot, Lisa screamed, her voice raw, unleashing slurs, curses, anything she could throw at him. Anything that might breach the unshakable, immovable wall that was Jalon Bennett, but nothing worked. Jalon had already won. One of the officers sighed heavily, rubbing his temple before turning Lisa around and escorting her toward the squad car. You had every opportunity to remain silent, madam, Lisa continued to scream, kicking wildly, attempting to resist the inevitable. Jalon did not move, did not flinch, did not even react. He simply watched as they shoved her into the back seat, slamming the door shut behind her, muffling her shrieks into a garbled mess of outrage and hopelessness. The other officer let out a breath before stepping toward him, clearing his throat. Are you certain you wish to press charges? Jalon glanced at the squad car, listening to the muffled cries of a woman who had spent her entire life believing she would never face consequences. Then, with perfect clarity, he nodded. Oh, absolutely. Jalon stood outside the police station, his arms crossed loosely over his chest, his stance relaxed, his expression unreadable as he observed the officers escorting Lisa Whitmore through the front doors. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a sterile glow across the tiled floor, making the moment feel strangely surreal. Lisa's screams had subsided into pathetic, trembling sobs. Her energy depleted, her throat raw from her earlier outburst. She had fought. She had denied. She had begged. None of it had made a difference. Now she was merely another suspect being booked. Just another name on a police report. Just another criminal facing the repercussions of her own actions. Jalon found himself at peace with the unfolding events. All right, one of the officers stated, taking a step back and adjusting the notepad in his hand. Just to confirm, Mr. Bennett, you are pressing charges for assault, harassment, vandalism, and reckless endangerment. You are also seeking restitution for damages to your vehicle, correct? Jalon nodded once, his voice steady. That is correct. The officer, a man in his middle years exhibiting the weary demeanor of someone accustomed to dealing with individuals like Lisa Whitmore, let out a slow sigh. I can't fault you for it. You are entirely within your rights, and considering all the evidence captured on video, I doubt she has any viable defense. Jalon offered no immediate reply. It was unnecessary. He had already secured victory long before they arrived at the station. Lisa had irrevocably sealed her own fate the instant she chose to instigate an attack. The moment she launched into her histrionics, confident that her tears and her race would shield her from accountability, she had sealed her doom. She had banked on the system protecting her. Instead, it had turned on her husband? Jalon inquired, shifting his gaze towards the holding cells at the rear of the precinct. What is occurring with him? The officer consulted his notes. Brad Whitmore remains unconscious, but paramedics have assessed him. He is unharmed, merely sustained a significant blow. He will likely regain consciousness within the next few hours with a severely bruised ego and an immense headache. His charges will mirror his wife's, with the addition of resisting arrest and destruction of property. That rock hurled through your windshield alone carries a substantial fine, and depending on the judge's discretion, potentially imprisonment. Jalon exhaled, giving a slight nod. Good. Brad had always been a congenital coward, a man who wielded his physical presence and aggression as tools to intimidate others, a man who had never truly experienced a genuine confrontation until this very day. And now he was reduced to a senseless, unconscious figure occupying a cell, awaiting the moment he would awaken to realize his ordeal had not concluded. Jaylen looked at the officer, and their defense, the officer emitted a brief, dry chuckle. If they possess any sense, they will plead guilty and seek a reduced sentence. However, given her earlier conduct, he shook his head. I wouldn't be remotely surprised if she doubles down. Jaylen allowed himself a slight smirk, because indeed, that sounded precisely like her. Lisa was not the sort of person to concede defeat. She would claw, she would bite, she would contort herself into the role of victim until her very last breath, but it would prove futile. Not this time. Jaylen had meticulously ensured that. All right, the officer stated, closing his notepad. Your attorney will be in communication with the district attorney's office, but given the evidence, you should have no cause for concern. Should you need to submit any further documentation, our department is managing your case file, so please feel free to reach out directly. Jaylen nodded once. I appreciate that. With that, the officer offered a brief nod and departed, disappearing down the corridor. Jaylen remained there for another moment, allowing the gravity of the situation to fully absorb him, not in a manner that weighed him down, but rather as a potent reminder of the immense power derived from steadfastly defending one's position. This incident could have concluded with a profoundly different outcome had he lost his temper, had he initiated the physical altercation, had he permitted them to dictate the narrative, but he had not. And now they were confined to holding cells awaiting formal charges. He, however, was walking away free. He stepped outside, the cool night air caressing his skin, the distant hum of the city a subtle backdrop. His vehicle remained a wreck, its shattered windshield mirroring the dim streetlights, but it held no significance. It would be repaired, and Lisa and Brad Whitmore, they would never rectify the damage they had inflicted upon themselves, for their names would forever be irrevocably linked to this episode. The world was no longer the same as it once was. This was not some clandestine affair where their transgressions would fade into obscurity. This was documented on video. It would be disseminated widely, and the people they knew, their neighbors, their colleagues, their friends, all of them would witness it. Jaylen exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Some individuals never seemed to learn. Producing his phone, he dialed his lawyer's number, placing it to his ear as he ambled towards the street. Hey, he said as soon as the call connected. Yeah, it's done. File the paperwork first thing in the morning. I want this handled swiftly. A pause ensued, followed by a chuckle from the other end. Yeah, you already know. Jaylen smirked, terminating the call. This was justice, and he intended to ensure Lisa and Brad experienced its full force. Jaylen settled back into his chair, his fingers idly tapping the side of his coffee cup as he browsed his phone, observing the world's reaction in real time. The narrative had already begun to disseminate with a speed that surpassed even his own anticipations, infiltrating every social media platform, weaving its way into online discourse, news segments, and local gossip circles. He harbored no surprise. There was little that captivated people more than witnessing the self-destruction of the entitled. And Lisa and Brad Whitmore, they had certainly provided the world with a spectacle. The initial video had surfaced within hours, captured from multiple perspectives, seamlessly edited by an online contributor clearly adept at exposing individuals. It commenced with Lisa's parking lot outburst, her racist tirade recorded with agonizing clarity, interspersed with footage of her striking Jaylen, her instigation of Brad, their ludicrous attempt to escape, and their ultimate downfall. The audio was pristine, capturing every insult, every falsehood, every misstep, and it had gone viral. Jaylen scrolled past thousands of comments. Some were derisive, some furious, and some simply astounded by the sheer idiocy of it all. This white woman genuinely believed she could strike a Navy SEAL and walk away. The way she transitioned from racist screeching to victim mode the moment she was restrained. Classic. Her husband getting knocked out in 0.5 seconds will never not be funny. Imagine losing your job, your reputation, and likely your home because you couldn't handle losing a parking space. Jaylen emitted a low chuckle, shaking his head. People were not merely observing this. They were devouring it. Lisa and Brad's names were ubiquitous, dragged through the mud across every social media platform, news outlet, and online forum. Their likenesses were transformed into memes, their meltdowns meticulously dissected, their downfall met with widespread celebration. And then, of course, came the tangible repercussions in the real world. He took another sip of coffee, his phone vibrating in his hand as another message arrived from his lawyer. Whitmore's employer just released a statement. They fired her. Jalen smirked, tapping the link. Official statement from Westridge Realty. Effective immediately, Lisa Whitmore is no longer employed with Westridge Realty. Our company does not tolerate discrimination or hateful behavior of any kind. The actions displayed in the widely circulated video do not reflect our values, and we have terminated her position accordingly. Jalen shook his head, exhaling slowly. She was finished. Real estate is fundamentally built upon reputation, trust, and public perception. No one would consider hiring a woman whose face was now synonymous with bigotry and delusion. And Brad. Jalen swiped to another article, already anticipating its contents. Local construction manager Brad Whitmore terminated following viral altercation. He skimmed the article, already foreseeing the corporate public relations team distancing themselves from him. In light of recent events, Danning & Sons Construction has severed ties with Brad Whitmore. Effective immediately, we take these matters seriously and hold our employees to the highest standard of conduct both on and off the job. Jalen emitted a low hum of satisfaction. That represented 2 careers obliterated in less than 24 hours. They had embarked on this debacle assuming they could operate with impunity, believing themselves untouchable. They had presumed the world would align with them, that their privilege would serve as an impenetrable shield. They had been gravely mistaken. Jalen leaned back in his chair, allowing his thoughts to wander momentarily, observing as more headlines flooded in, more official statements, more social media clips, more fragments of their lives unraveling. Lisa was now officially blacklisted from her profession. No brokerage firm, no real estate agency would engage with her. Her face was too recognizable, her name too toxic. Brad's career in construction was likewise concluded. No site manager, no foreman would willingly invite the headache of associating with someone whose presence would inevitably attract negative press. And their neighbors, their so-called friends, their entire social circle had all disassociated themselves. Jalen clicked on a local community Facebook page, his gaze scanning the comments. She used to be involved in the PTA, not anymore. She was dismissed this morning. Someone egged their house last night. Their children aren't even attending school. They must be too embarrassed. Jalen exhaled slowly, allowing the reality to fully settle. This was the embodiment of accountability. Not merely a minor reprimand, not solely a financial penalty or a perfunctory apology. These were tangible, significant consequences. Lisa and Brad Whitmore had constructed their lives on the premise that they could act with impunity, speak with abandon, and inflict harm upon whomever they pleased without ever facing repercussions. And now they were undergoing the most arduous lesson of all. Jalen leaned forward, setting his cup down, his gaze drifting towards the distant city skyline. This transcended the individuals involved. It pertained to every person who had ever found themselves in a similar predicament. Every individual who had remained silent, who had acquiesced, who had endured mistreatment due to the deeply ingrained understanding that the system was inherently biased against them. Jalen had stood his ground, and the world had borne witness to it. This was not merely justice. This was a stark illustration, and Lisa and Brad would forever be haunted by it. Jalen occupied the polished wooden chair in the courthouse hallway, his posture at ease, hands resting languidly in his lap, his gaze partially fixed on the door before him. The legal proceedings had advanced with unexpected celerity, accelerated by the overwhelming evidence, the video recordings, the witness testimonies, and perhaps most crucially, the media frenzy that had erupted surrounding the case. The global community had observed. The world had rendered its judgment. And now, the world was poised to witness its definitive conclusion. His legal counsel, a sharp-witted woman adorned in a tailored navy suit, stood beside him, absently tapping her tablet. As she reviewed the case files, she betrayed no sign of nervousness or uncertainty. If anything, she appeared disengaged, as though the outcome were so preordained that participating in the proceedings was merely a formality, and so it was. The moment the judge had been presented with the complete, unedited footage of the parking lot confrontation, the subsequent police pursuit, the physical assaults, and the ensuing racist tirade, there was little left for the defense to argue. Brad had entered a plea of no contest to his charges. Lisa, conversely, had employed every conceivable tactic. She claimed the videos were misleading, asserted she had been provoked, and even alleged that Jaylen had somehow orchestrated the situation to cast her in a negative light. None of these assertions proved effective because the truth was stark, raw, and irrefutable. And now, as the final court session approached its denouement, the door before him finally swung open. Jaylen rose slowly, entering the courtroom, his gaze finding Lisa and Brad, who were seated at the defendant's table. They bore no resemblance to the individuals he had encountered in that parking lot. Lisa's customary composed confidence had been entirely eroded, her hair pulled back into a severe taut bun, her face pale and gaunt, her once immaculate fingernails gnawed down. She was not wearing the fashionable, pristine attire she had previously flaunted. Today, she was clad in something understated, something that blended into the background, an attempt to diminish her presence. Brad, seated beside her, presented an even more disheveled figure. Faint bruises from their last encounter still marked his jaw. His posture was slumped, his eyes weary, radiating an aura of exhaustion and defeat. Jaylen took his seat, barely casting them another glance. The judge adjusted her spectacles, her expression unreadable as she perused the final case notes. The hushed murmurs within the courtroom subsided as she cleared her throat and addressed the assembly. Having reviewed all presented evidence, including multiple first-hand witness accounts, video documentation, and prior statements made by both defendants, the court finds Lisa and Brad Whitmore guilty on all charges. Lisa's sharp inhalation echoed through the room. Brad's head drooped forward, his fingers clenching into fists on the table. The judge continued, her voice steady but firm. Lisa Whitmore is hereby sentenced to 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation. She will also be required to attend court-mandated racial sensitivity training, and a restraining order will be issued between her and the plaintiff, Mr. Jaylen Bennett. Lisa's breathing became increasingly rapid, shallow, and uneven, her eyes darting wildly around the room, as if an escape route still existed from the inevitable. Jaylen remained impassive, recognizing this outcome as precisely what she deserved. The judge did not cease there. Brad Whitmore is sentenced to 1 year in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. His additional charges for resisting arrest and destruction of property necessitate monetary fines, which he will be obligated to pay to the plaintiff in full. Jaylen's attorney shifted slightly beside him, a subtle, knowing smile flickering across her lips, because that was not the entirety of the judgment. The court has also ruled in favor of Mr. Bennett's civil lawsuit for damages, including full restitution for property destruction, emotional distress, and legal fees. The defendants are required to pay the sum of $75,000 in damages. Lisa emitted a strangled sound, a mixture of sob and protest, but the judge barely acknowledged it. This is a final ruling. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Lisa collapsed into her chair, her shoulders shaking, her mouth moving in silent, desperate incantations. Brad, motionless and silent, did not even look up. Jaylen, for the first time since this entire ordeal began, allowed himself a genuine exhale. It was over. Court officers approached Lisa and Brad, instructing them to stand, their destinies now entirely beyond their own control. Lisa continued whispering, "This isn't fair. This isn't happening. I didn't do anything wrong." But no one was listening. Brad moved with the resignation of a man accepting his fate. His hands were extended as handcuffs were placed around his wrists. The stark reality of his sentence finally crushed the last vestiges of any defiance he might have retained. As they were escorted toward the exit, Lisa finally looked at Jaylen. There was nothing left in her eyes but pure, unadulterated despair. Jaylen merely tilted his head slightly, offering her one last, inscrutable glance. He had no need to utter a word. She understood. She understood that she had lost. She understood that she would never escape this. She understood that regardless of where she went, regardless of what she did, she would forever be known as the woman who forfeited everything because she could not accept that a black man had bested her to a parking space. Jalen turned away as she was no longer his concern. Stepping outside, the air felt cool, crisp, and liberated. He retrieved his phone. Another notification appeared, a confirmation of deposit from his lawyer. Brad and Lisa's bank accounts had already been depleted to commence his compensation. Jalen offered a slight smirk. This was justice, and he had earned every moment of it. Jalen adjusted the cuff of his jacket, exhaling slowly as he exited the dealership, the crisp air settling comfortably against his skin. The weight of the keys in his palm felt appropriate, earned, a tangible symbol of all that had culminated in this moment. The sleek new vehicle positioned before him gleamed under the soft illumination of the overhead lights. Its deep black finish was as smooth as glass, reflecting his own calm expression back at him. It had been a long time coming. The lawsuit had concluded swiftly, with Brad and Lisa compelled to liquidate assets, their accounts drained to satisfy the settlement. Jalen hadn't genuinely required their funds, not intrinsically, but there was an undeniable satisfaction in utilizing their own arrogance to finance his new vehicle. He stepped forward, running his fingers over the hood of the car, appreciating its unblemished perfection. No cracks, no shattered glass, no remnants of a rock propelled by bitterness and animosity, only clean, untainted victory. He settled into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors, inhaling the scent of fresh leather and quiet triumph. The engine purred to life, smooth and robust, a sound that promised liberation. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, allowing the sense of accomplishment to permeate his chest before pulling out of the lot. It would have been effortless to leave everything behind, to never contemplate them again. But there was one final destination he needed to visit. He maintained a steady pace, unhurried, his hands relaxed on the wheel, his body at ease in a manner it hadn't been for weeks. The city lights flickered past, the ambient hum of the world moving around him, yet he felt no urgency, for he already knew what awaited him as he turned onto the familiar street. He spotted the house instantly. It appeared altered, not physically, not externally, but there was an indefinable hollowness to it now, a sense of diminished pride that had once resided there, replaced by resentment and anger. The front lawn, once meticulously manicured and immaculately maintained, had begun to show signs of decay around the edges, patches of neglect encroaching like a slow, inevitable decline. And inside, Jalen smirked as he heard them before he even saw them. The argument was vociferous, heated, raw fury emanating through the thin walls of their overpriced suburban confinement. "I told you to shut up," Brad's voice boomed, thick with exasperation and weariness. "You simply couldn't refrain from running your mouth. You just had to keep going. And now look at us. Look at us, Lisa. What on earth are we supposed to do now?" Lisa's voice immediately followed, shrill, raw, and desperate. "Oh, so this is my fault!" she shrieked, her words barely holding together, her breath ragged from weeks of relentless consequences. "I didn't throw the damn rock, Brad. You did that. You're the one who got knocked out like a pathetic loser on camera. Don't you dare place this on me." Jalen leaned back slightly, resting his elbow against the window frame, his fingers tapping idly against the door as he listened. It was entirely predictable. Of course, they were turning on each other now. Individuals of their ilk invariably did when the world ceased to overlook their behavior. Brad's voice escalated in anger, punctuated by a heavy slamming sound echoing through the house as he struck something. Likely a wall, perhaps a table, or merely the air itself. A futile attempt to reclaim a sense of strength. "Oh, don't start with that ridiculousness," he roared, his voice cracking at the edges. "I lost everything because of you. My job, my reputation. Do you have any idea what people are saying about us? Do you know what they call us now?" Lisa's response was immediate and unhinged. "You think I don't know?" You think I don't hear it every single time I step outside? I can't even go to the grocery store without people staring at me like I'm some kind of monster." Brad let out a bitter laugh, the kind of laughter that emanated from a man who had finally comprehended the magnitude of his loss. "You are a monster," he muttered darkly. A moment of silence ensued, followed by a loud, sharp crash, as if Lisa had hurled something. Jalen chuckled, shaking his head slightly. It had only just begun for them. They would never escape this. Not in a year, not in 5 years, never. Their names were indelibly etched into history as cautionary tales. Their faces were seared into every corner of the internet. Their careers, their reputations, their very lives utterly and irrevocably wrecked. Jalen harbored no hatred for them. They weren't worthy of such an emotion. They were merely another stark reminder that some individuals lack the foresight to cease, to withdraw, to relinquish their self-imposed sense of entitlement before it ultimately engulfs them. And now they were submerged. He exhaled deliberately, a subtle shake of his head preceding his decisive press on the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, smoothly departing from the curb, leaving behind those ensnared in their own self-made ruin. Before him, the thoroughfare unfolded, vast and unburdened, his path forward untainted by their setbacks. There was no necessity for a backward glance. The past had been thoroughly addressed.